Well, greetings and welcome everyone. You're in another episode of Hippocrates Docs, Just One Thing for Health. I'm Velyn Hawkins and I'm part of the team here that is helping to bring this vital information to you to learn how to walk a little more steadfastly on this journey with your whole food, plant-based diet and lifestyle. We have this week the dynamic duo, the Alters, Benjamin and Susanna Alter, and they are the CEOs of Alter Health in Carbondale, Colorado. They're naturopathic doctors and practice lifestyle medicine. And I'm just going to get right into it because we have got an amazing topic tonight. Why say no to GMOs? And this is going to be good because, like me, I'd heard about GMOs. I'm like, no GMOs, but I didn't really get the connection until I started doing my homework. I feel like Larry King coming to the table after I've done my research now. So without further ado, Benjamin and Susanna, say hello and tell us a little bit about yourselves, where you're from, what you're doing, and how it is you decided to bring this information to us tonight.
Great. Well, thank you so much for the warm welcome, Velyn. We're so excited to be here tonight. A little bit about ourselves, where we've come from. I'm from Michigan originally, but we've lived in Portland, Oregon for the last 5 years. We went to naturopathic medical school in Portland, Oregon, where we met. And now we're bringing lifestyle medicine to Carbondale, Colorado, and loving it here so far.
Yeah, and I'm originally from Phoenix, Arizona, and have always been passionate, enthusiastic about living a healthy lifestyle. And I love the mission and the vision and what Hippocrates Docs is doing. And I love that it's called Hippocrates Docs. And I love how we can do just one thing for our health. And because I think we can be really overwhelmed really easily a lot of the time, given the state of the world and the state of the quantity of information that we're exposed to. So I like the idea of just focusing in on one thing at a time and kind of just mastering one little piece of information at the time as we walk forward with more, strength and confidence in our health journey.
Awesome. Yes. And I am so happy to say that I believe our audience is really ready for what it is that you're bringing tonight in this conversation about genetically modified foods. So tell us a little bit about, how did this whole nut called GMOs get cracked open?
Yeah, well, I'm trying to, reminisce back and remember how I was first introduced to the topic from a health perspective. I remember learning about, being in the supermarket and learning that, the apples are bigger and shinier and the tomatoes are perfect and these foods are bred to be more and more perfect. And that's one aspect of genetic modification that we're familiar with. And there's a whole other kind of darker, dirtier side of genetic modification that has really, only been revealed to me in the more recent times. And that is the genetic modification that Monsanto does with their seeds to make some varieties of crops resistant to harsh chemical herbicides that are used in conventional farming practices. So this has only been, taking place for, just over 20 years. And in terms of my awareness of it, gosh, it's only been a year or two since I have really been, aware of what's going on in terms of the exposure to specifically the herbicide Roundup that, people are dumping on their lawns. And that's one whole issue. But in addition to that, the chemical is being dumped on farm fields across the globe. So, yeah. It is, and I appreciate your just acknowledgement of the fact that it is really a big topic, because it spans way farther beyond, just the health of humanity, the health of human beings. And we're really talking about the health of the planet. And we know, that we are animals, wild animals that have been tamed on this planet. And we are only as healthy as our ecosystem, as our environment. So really, when we're talking about healing ourselves in this context, we're also talking about healing the world and healing the earth, and regenerating the soil, the land, growing food in a sustainable, healthy way. It's a conversation that spans way beyond just blood work and cholesterol and hormones and biochemistry. It's really global.
It really is. And I really appreciate you bringing that up, because from the types of foods that are used to feed animals, I mean, it goes right up the line, right? If they're feeding the animals the foods that have the genetically modified seeds in feed, and we're eating the animals' meat, or have in past, and we'll get to that in a minute too. It just it's self-propagating, right?
It is. And one thing that's really scary about this whole GMO movement is, well, we haven't really gotten into the talk about the herbicides being used on the GMOs at this point, but the herbicide, specifically glyphosate, is a water-soluble toxin. And that means that even after we've eaten the food and it's gone through our system, it's soluble in our water systems. So even the food or even the glyphosate that isn't being sprayed directly on the foods, but elsewhere in the environment, that's getting in our water system. And so it's becoming a very ubiquitous toxin that it's actually getting harder to kind of protect ourselves from, because once it gets in our waterways, it gets into our drinking water, it gets into our rain, and so it's even now being rained down on organic produce and things like that. So yes, as we've said before, it's becoming a very global issue because of the water solubility of the actual toxin.
And talk to us about the actual toxin. What does it do? I understand that it does something to the crops, but it also does something to the insects. It also does something else to the animals. It also does things to humans. Tell us a little bit about where it kind of starts and what it looks like.
Yeah, well, this molecule called glyphosate, if you're familiar with, human biochemistry, you know that our proteins are made up of amino acids. And the glyphosate molecule is like two glycine molecules, which are one of the, most commonly used amino acids in human biology. So the glyphosate molecule is two glycine molecules with a phosphate that connects them. Just to kind of paint the picture, wish we could draw it, but it doesn't matter that much. But the idea is that this molecule disrupts. It was studied by Monsanto to disrupt a pathway called the shikimate pathway, and the shikimate pathway is a pathway it's a biosynthetic pathway that's only in the plant kingdom. Or only in plants, microbes, microorganisms, bacteria, and fungi, not in animals. So there's different kingdoms of, on this planet in terms of life. And the shikimate pathway is not in animals, not in dogs or cats or humans. So Monsanto was studying this molecule that disrupts this enzyme in this pathway, and they thought, okay, humans don't have this pathway, they don't have this enzyme in them, so therefore it must be relatively safe for humans to be exposed to this chemical. And maybe in the short term, in small quantities, maybe it is, maybe that is the truth. But the fact of the matter is that the shikimate pathway is a pathway for producing amino acids, tryptophan, phenylalanine, and tyrosine. And these three amino acids are essential amino acids, meaning that we need to get them from food in order to create the building blocks that make up all of our proteins, all of our hormones, all of our neurotransmitters. We require, an abundant amount of tryptophan, phenylalanine, and tyrosine in our diets. And so the direct activity of glyphosate is to disrupt the production of these amino acids, thereby killing the plants. And I think Monsanto was a little short-sighted to not consider the fact that human beings are dependent on these amino acids for their own health. And that's just one of the functions of glyphosate. That was the function that was initially studied, like I said, by Monsanto. Now that it's been in use for over 40 years, we know a lot of other effects that glyphosate has. For example, it's also a really strong antibiotic straight out. We know that it disrupts this pathway in bacteria, which would, make bacteria less viable, but it also directly kills bacteria. And it kills bacteria in the soil, it kills bacteria in our guts, in our ecosystem internally, and it kills bacteria everywhere, in the water supply, you name it. And a lot of, until more recently, we've only been, aware more recently of the extremely intimate and very important connection that human beings have with microorganisms, have with bacteria. For a long time, we believed that all bacteria were bad and we needed to stay clean and free from bacteria. But now we know that our life is totally dependent on the life of a healthy ecosystem and as far as bacterial organisms and environments are concerned. So we disrupt the bacterial ecosystem in the soil, on the earth, in our bodies, and we're just totally out of whack. And, without getting too in the weeds in terms of the bacteria piece, it's just interesting to note that there are over 100 times, I think 1,000 times more bacterial cells in and on the human body than there are human cells. So we're mostly bacteria if we just, count our cells. So if we're disrupting the bacterial ecosystem, like I said, in and on our bodies, then we're disrupting most of our cells. And that's just the antibacterial, antibiotic piece. So so speaking to the question of what does glyphosate do and how and why is it so toxic, the shikimate pathway disruption, the antibiotic piece, and then there's some other things if you're ready to get into those as well.
Yeah, well, absolutely, because one of the things that became clear to me and that you kind of touched on was that, it does stem from causing nutrient deficiency in the early stages, I'll put it that way. And that nutrient deficiency translates to, up the food chain, more nutrient deficiency. And, so let's talk about some of the things that nutrient deficiency actually relates to in people, because I've learned allergies and even like Alzheimer's and all kinds of diseases and chronic illnesses have come about because of the nutrient deficiency. And we think we're eating healthy.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah. And so another thing that you're speaking to that glyphosate does is that it's a strong chelator. So it basically traps minerals within the soil, and therefore and it robs those minerals from the plants. So like you said, we think we're eating healthfully, but the food we're eating now has just nowhere near as many minerals and vitamins as food 50, 70, 100 years ago. And so not only is there vitamin and mineral deficiency in the foods that we're eating, but when we get glyphosate within our system, it binds and holds on and basically guards against utilization of minerals within our body as well. And so, yes, there is this epidemic of mineral and nutrient deficiency in our culture today, and it is linked with numerous conditions.
Yeah.
I'll hand it over to you.
Well, we know that Hippocrates says, "Let food be thy medicine," and glyphosate strips the medicine out of the food. So we're really at this state of this chronic disease epidemic that's caused by so many toxicities in the environment, so many toxicities in our food supply, so much, overconsumption of the wrong things, underconsumption of the right things. And then in order to fix that, we know that the way to do that is food. And yet we're faced with this big roadblock because our food is not as medicinal as it was before the presence of glyphosate in our environment. And even the best organic food is not as medicinal. But obviously that's where we need to go, is sourcing the best organically grown food on the most nutrient dense soils as possible. But unfortunately, that's largely out of our control for 99.99% of the people on the planet. So I'm sure we'll get into some of the things that we can practically do, of course. But yeah.
Yeah, I think to answer your question, talking about the health effects of nutrient deficiency, it really comes down to, on a cellular level, we need these minerals. They're crucial cofactors for the biochemical pathways that occur for cellular function. So it affects every system in the body when we're deficient in these minerals. And one example is simply immunity, the immune system. Zinc is one of the most important minerals for immune health, as well as many other minerals. And so that's, when people are getting ill around flu season, a common supplement is zinc. And really it goes beyond zinc. In order to really kind of mitigate the effects of glyphosate, we need to consider all the minerals.
Yeah. I mean, we can single in on any mineral and give some, interesting statistics and information. Another one being magnesium, which is, we know how important magnesium for so many things. One thing that I just learned in the last year is that we need proper levels of magnesium in order to activate vitamin D. And we have an epidemic of low vitamin D, and a lot of people are being pushed vitamin D and supplementing by vitamin D and getting outside and still having trouble at maintaining vitamin D levels. And maybe the underlying cause of this is really a magnesium deficiency, a subclinical magnesium deficiency, which, is due to the fact that magnesium is robbed from our food by glyphosate. So that's just another mineral. Then there's cobalt, which is necessary for the activation of B12, methylcobalamin, which is a, cobalt bound with our B12 vitamin. And we need enough cobalt, we need enough molybdenum, which is an essential mineral for the activation of these enzymes that are involved in the sulfation of different proteins and molecules, one of which being collagen sulfate. And a lot of people are having joint pain and arthritis and being told to take collagen and being told to take the cofactors of collagen. But a lot of people have this sulfation issue, which comes down to a molybdenum deficiency and then improper, so there's so many different really nitty-gritty, interesting things that stem from various mineral deficiencies. But like Susanna said, we just have to think about minerals come together and they're supposed to be used together. And plants are experts at acquiring minerals from the soil, given that the fact that, if there's not glyphosate in the way. So.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And you spoke about Monsanto, and Monsanto makes Roundup. They make the glyphosate that's sprayed on the crops too. And then do they actually also inject the crops? Or are they beyond injection now and they've reduced everything to a spray-like substance that they can do like the crop sprays?
Yeah, well, what they've done is they've made the seed, the glyphosate ready seed, Roundup ready seed. So what that means is that this seed is ready for glyphosate to be dumped on it and for it not to affect the production of a healthy crop. So that allows farmers to use this weed control agent very liberally in their fields, and the consequence is super weeds. So as with anything, with antibiotics or whenever we manipulate our environment, we're going to kill off some weeds, and then we're going to breed various weeds and various plants that are resistant to the effects of glyphosate. So that causes the farmers to actually dump more of this chemical onto their fields. So it's really, it's not the farmer's fault. They're trying to make a buck, they're just in this system that's really broken and screwed up. And but the result is that more and more Roundup is being dumped on this planet. And I read somewhere that since it was introduced in 1974, was when Roundup was brought to the market. It was in 1996 that Monsanto developed the GMO seed that was resistant to Roundup. But since 1974, I read, and this was a couple of years ago, the statistic, but 3.5 billion pounds of glyphosate, which is the active ingredient in Roundup, has been dumped on the planet in the last 40 years or whatever, 45 years. So
wow,
that's a lot. It's a lot of toxin that's, kind of in our supply. And this chemical does get broken down. There's been research that shows that there's very thankfully, thank you, Mother Earth, for being as wise as you are. There are bacteria on this planet that are able to break down the glyphosate molecule and digest it and, render it inactive and get it out of the supply. But, we need to know that these bacteria don't work as fast as we're dumping glyphosate on our planet. And who knows, maybe these bacteria will be wiped out in the process. So we need to obviously stop the cycle of dumping the chemical on the planet.
Yeah, and the use of glyphosate used to be more regulated. Right around the time when it came out, there were rules limiting the amount of glyphosate to be no more than 0.05 milligrams per kilogram of crop harvested. But then when the Roundup Ready seed was developed, there was just no way that they could keep the amount of glyphosate that low. And so they actually increased it from 0.05 milligrams per kilogram to 20.
wow,
Big jump.
Big jump.
Yes.
So I don't know if those regulations are enforced even, but it just goes to show that whatever force at play, manipulated whatever restrictions were, present, and who knows to what extent those regulations are abided by in farming practices. But yeah.
I think you bring up an excellent point, because while doing some of my research, I found out that the attorney, chief counsel for Monsanto, also a doctor, was made the secretary of whatever. He was put in the highest political place governing what the FDA was and was not saying that Monsanto could do, of course.
Yeah.
And it allowed Monsanto to do even more. And so while, you know, it may be even statistically that 20 was the number, it could have just been a number, and who knows what was really happening. And that's sad, because I think that it's also over time that we've been able to see. I think there was one family that I remember seeing a thing about where there were 5 children, and from the time the first one was born, and the mom breastfed all of the children, but the time that the last child was born, and she swore that nothing happened differently with her diet. She was very careful through every pregnancy, and by the time the 5th child was born, the child had autism and food allergies. And it was like, what happened? And doing some research, she found out that the foods that they had been eating were shifted to GMO foods without even knowing it. The consumption was occurring. They changed her body chemistry, her blood chemistry, and of course the baby was getting it from the womb. And you know, it wasn't until the baby was born that they really realized that something was even wrong. And to understand how this happens in hormones and things like that, I understand that there is a growth hormone, RBGH, the bovine growth hormone. Are you aware of that, and can you speak to that just a little?
What context? What is the the bovine growth hormone? What?
It's related to milk. That's what it is. It's related to.
Yeah, I mean, you know, these dairy cows are given all sorts of hormones, antibiotics, and I think, you know, that is one of them that the dairy cows are given. And I guess, can I speak to what that does to us human beings who consume that?
Absolutely, please.
I'm not, you know, I'm not an expert in what bovine growth hormone does to human beings, but I do know what bovine growth hormone does to cows. It makes cows grow really fast, really big, really fast. So, so, you know, that is certainly one thing that it does consequentially to humans as well. But beyond that, I'm not really too sure about how scientifically the human body, you know, manipulates bovine growth hormone. I know human beings we have our own growth hormone, which is actually a very desirable hormone. You know, some people call it a human growth hormone as kind of the anti-aging hormone, which is something that we want to keep elevated as in our life and through our lifestyle. But bovine growth hormone is certainly a different story. But beyond that, I don't know if I can answer your question to, you know.
Well, I think you gave us enough. We have really brought into a lot of the previous conversations about milk and some of the issues with dairy in general. And one of the things that actually has come about is, of course, these cows are eating the GMO seeds and soy and hay and corn and alfalfa, and now it's even they've even approved it to be Kentucky bluegrass, you know, and so it's spreading. And because we don't know what's happening, we are blissfully unaware. And then we look up and we're dealing with this issue or that issue, trying to figure out what we can do about it. So let's flip the script now. What can we do to counteract some of these things? If glyphosate is so difficult to kill, is it constantly reproducing in our systems? if we do have it, and if that's the case, how do we stop it? How do we get it out?
Yeah.
What do
Well,
we do?
so just to start on that conversation, it's really important to know that, it goes without saying that the human body is extremely resilient. We're able to be faced with all these crazy, synthetic chemicals and experimental things, and we're actually doing quite well with all things considered. And it's also important to note that the human body, when the environment is optimized inside and out, the human body, we know that it heals itself pretty darn well. That's what it does best. The human body heals itself. And some people say, oh, the human body can heal itself. And we say, no, the human body always heals itself. There's no can or can't. That's what it's always doing. It's always doing its best. And therefore, our symptoms are a result of the healing effort that our body is doing. So how do we optimize? The question is like, how do we optimize the environment in our body given the state of the environment outside of our body? And it really comes down to, as we know, the choices that we're making on moment to moment throughout our day. Specifically, this conversation is specifically focused on food, as is the Just One Thing for Health program. And, in naturopathic medical school, there's, in the profession, there's kind of an old saying that health starts in the gut. And we know that really when we're aiming to heal any chronic condition, we really have to look at the health and the integrity of the digestive system, which is one place where we haven't really talked about how glyphosate really directly targets the digestive system, which leads to the downstream effects of deteriorated health on all levels. So the conversation in terms of what we can do and what we need to do really comes back to the health of the gut, healing the gut, and doing so with whole food, plant-based nutrition, specifically, higher fiber diets that feed our good microorganisms that naturally secrete a biofilm that creates more resilience within our intestinal system, that makes us more resilient to the harsh effects of various chemicals like glyphosate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so kind of, stepping back and talking about some of the basics, the more practical ways that we can really strengthen that resiliency within our body. We talked a little bit in our 10-minute video about eating organic, choosing organic. That is going to be the best way to keep glyphosate out of the body. There may be trace amounts on the organic produce from the rain, as we said before, but nowhere near the amount of glyphosate that's on GMO, conventionally grown foods. And specifically, we mentioned before that those GMO foods we really want to avoid are soy, corn, canola, and sugar. There's an additional group of non-GMO foods that are heavily sprayed with Roundup or glyphosate, and those are wheat, barley, millet, peas, legumes. Did I miss any?
I mean, those are the big ones.
But what we didn't talk about that is really, really important is this idea that glyphosate does bioaccumulate in animal products. So glyphosate, like Ben mentioned in the beginning, has a really similar chemical structure to a very crucial, important amino acid, glycine. And glycine is used in every protein that makes up the animal flesh, animal body.
There's glycine in everything. Yeah.
So when glyphosate is replacing glycine in our animal foods, you better believe it's going to be in meat, in dairy, and in eggs. and is also stored within the bone marrow. So, you know, we see bone broth becoming so popular as a way to heal the gut, but it's actually doing more harm than good to the gut, because you're just consuming a high dose of glyphosate, which, as Ben said, is very harmful for the gut lining. So back to
what else can we do? What else can we do? Yeah, you know, obviously shopping at the, you know, organic section of the supermarket and farmers markets, and maybe growing your own garden, which has totally, you know, I know that historically it was really a popular thing to do. Everyone had their own garden for forever in history, and only in the last decades have we kind of, you know, poo-pooed growing your own food out the back door. But I think that that is a really great way to get really great nutrition, and it doesn't have to, you don't have to eat everything from your garden. But I just started growing microgreens inside, which is a good way to, you know, get mineral rich, you know, nutrient rich food, you know. And we can grow these inside gardens, indoor gardens, patio gardens, and that's just such a great way of getting at least a little bit of really optimal nutrition. Yeah.
I love that idea. That's a great way to bring the family into the whole aspect of healthy eating, is to do it as a family project. I know one of my crowdfunding research projects was on a couple who did fish tanks. And they started with these little 10-gallon fish tanks and dirt on the bottom and seeds, the right seeds, and growing stuff. And the family project was an 80-gallon, where you actually grew bigger stuff. It was really amazing to see. But Ellen, I want to say thank you for this information really quick. Ellen is letting us know that Bayer bought Monsanto and is now using a new pesticide that's projected to be even more destructive than glyphosate. And I just can't even imagine. I know I was reading about a new organism that was tiny, and they didn't even know what it was, but it was causing reproductive failure. And they were starting to insert that into the Roundup stuff. And it was a lot of the livestock were dying quickly from it. And, you know, I can't imagine. And Bayer, ooh.
Yeah, they're the biggest pharmaceutical company in the world. Yeah, so I'm sure they've got plans in terms of how to fix this, and fix this by, you know, what I mean, you know, selling whatever it is, you know, that might fix it. But
yeah, that's the pesticide is it Liberty Link? Is that the name of it? Liberty Link.
Yeah.
We just learned about this as well, and the links between the use of Liberty Link and infertility is scary, to say the least. Yeah.
I know they were saying over the last decade that there were, if there was a place where there was one fertility clinic in a 25 to 50 mile radius, there are now 20 or more. It has gotten that bad.
And that's certainly an issue that not many people talk about all that much, and not many people know all that much until they're wanting to reproduce. So, you know, I heard recently that 1 in 3 men are infertile and 1 in 4 women. I mean, and that's, you know, that doesn't really set the human race up for a good trajectory when we talk about the fact that evolution really requires, you know, procreativity.
Yeah.
So
yeah. So it makes me wonder, and this might be a crazy thought, but if there are people behind all of this, right? There's people at Monsanto and Bayer, and what are they eating that is so different, and what environments are they living in? If they're doing all of this and potentially killing people and the planet, why? What is the underlying reason? And if it's money, then we have to do something. And we have to do more than just shop organic. We have to do more than go to the farmers markets, where we don't know if those farmers or people who are selling have used Roundup as they're trying to manage their gardens. What are some of the ideas that you guys have and some of the things that you're implementing that are helping us on this journey?
Well, I think that you're really speaking to an important one now, just the fact of how, bringing this to the conversation. And I really truly believe that as we do so, we engage more people in the conversation, we see more eyes light up, we connect with more people and point out the truth to more people. And as we do so, we near a critical mass, which, once we hit a critical mass of awareness, there's no turning back. And the thing with truth, the thing with, this sort of information is, once you know it and once you hear it and once you feel it, you can't unknow it. You can't turn your back. You can't walk the other way. It just kind of leaves a mark. And I think that just continuing the conversation is certainly one thing to do on a practical, change-making level. And on a practical healing level, in terms of internally, one thing that we're both starting to explore is mineral replacement, which, we should say that we are absolutely not fans of supplemental nutrients in general. But given the state that, like we've talked about, glyphosate stripping the medicine out of the food, we've got to get our medicine from somewhere. We've got to get our minerals from somewhere, these minerals that allow all of our enzymes in our body to function properly. We need that for our body to have this fight, a fighting chance of healing itself. So we have been exploring replacing minerals through, just this morning, actually, we took Shilajit, which is it's spelled Shilajit, and it's a ancient soil that is, dug up from the Himalayan mountains, and it's just one of the, in terms of mineral density, it's just kind of the perfect mineral replacement. And it is the type of soil that, maybe that our foods really should be growing in. And we haven't really, I'm not an expert on farming practices, and we haven't talked at all about really other aspects of farming practices. But even if Roundup isn't in the conversation, we're still depleting the soils based on our conventional relationship with the land, the monocrop culture of just sucking, replacing sodium and potassium and phosphorus, NPK, replacing NPK and sucking up everything else from the soil. We need more than NPK, sodium, potassium, and phosphorus in our from our food. So that's another thing. And then, so there's some products that that we have been, exploring and experimenting with. And I think that given the fact that we really despise putting supplemental products in our body and really preferentially choose to get our medicine from food, I think it says a lot that we're taking supplements, something that we don't do aside from our, vitamin B12 and vitamin D.
Interesting. I was a couple of weeks ago doing some research on supplements, and the question that came to mind was, this one I was looking at was talking about 99% whole food, plant-based sourcing of the ingredients for their supplements. And it was DNA based. And based on what your DNA said that you were deficient in was how they determined the formula for your supplements. But if we're having these issues now with sourced vegetables and our crops, how might that translate to supplements that are using whole food plant-based sourcing?
Yeah, that's a great question. Where my head goes is that yes, they're going to be more concentrated. They're going to be probably extracts of those fruits and vegetables. And I think, most supplement brands, they go through the testing to figure out how much nutrients are actually within the supplement. But they're probably needing to use more food these days to get those higher amounts of vitamins and minerals. And unless they are really being grown in a farm that is very mindful about the mineral content of the soil. And so the mineral replacement supplements that Ben was referring to are kind of skipping one step and going straight to the soil. They're just harvesting ancient soil. But I still, going back to our philosophy at heart, we do believe that food is the best medicine, and we know through studies that the body utilizes nutrients much more efficiently when we take it in through a whole food form, because it has that synergistic effect. It's Mother Nature again working divinely to support us and our health.
Right.
And I think it's, also an interesting point to make that human beings aren't eating as much dirt these days as we used to. And the dirt that we are eating doesn't have, as we've talked about, doesn't really have much in it aside from dirt, none of the mineral stuff. So I think to look at dirt for supplements, look at, these sort of sources going straight to the source, but literally to get our minerals, I think really makes a lot of sense. And I think there's, I haven't looked at the science and any sort of research in terms of how effective these dirt-based mineral replacement supplements are, like Shilajit. But I don't know. I've got a good feeling, and I will certainly dive into the science as it reveals itself, because I think these kind of things are being used more and more. It is interesting that like this Shilajit kind of product has been actually used for thousands of years. People like literally ate the dirt of the Himalayan mountains for thousands of years. So I think it's interesting that there was that sort of connection with the lands. And here we are on the, other side of the spectrum, rubbing our vegetables, washing things off, using Windex and hand sanitizer. So I think that connecting, and this is another thing that we can do, connecting with the earth, like literally having some both dirt coming into our body in terms of on our food, which is okay. Also dirt under our feet. Also, it's interesting to know that when we take breaths in nature, we actually populate our internal microbiome as well. So breathing in, natural environments and really just optimizing this relationship with our bacterial family. I think that it's just such an important place to focus, because that's really where glyphosate and the GMOs disrupts that relationship amongst all the other things that we've talked about.
I agree. One of the things that we do encourage all of the Just One Thing for Health family to do is to make that reconnection with nature. walking in nature, sitting on the ground and, feeling the grass between your fingers. There is something really rather magical about it. And when we think about how we've disconnected from it, even those who live in environments where that is, really prevalent around them versus someone who lives in the inner city and it's the concrete jungle, and a lot of our youngsters now are finding that it's more advantageous for them to live in the city where there's not much dirt, much less grass around. And so, so I've got another question, but before I lose this train of thought, what would you suggest to them to bring nature into their environment?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's so funny because I was actually just in New York City last weekend, and I never thought about the surrounding area of New York. I always just thought of, that it's this big urban sprawl, this concrete jungle. And while I was there, I was just in New York for a night because the next day I went with my friend. My sister and all her friends, we drove out just an hour and a half outside the city, and her friends took the train, and it took even shorter because they didn't have to deal with traffic. And we were in beautiful forested area where there were trails and there was wildlife, and I was just blown away. Wow, just a quick train ride outside the city and you have access to the microbiome, or to the bacteria that populates our microbiome, like Ben was saying. And so I know that that's not a way of really bringing it into the city, but it's just a reminder that that no matter where you're living, even if you're in the heart of the city, treating your body to maybe a trip out of town once a month, even, if it means hopping on a train for an hour and a half, does your body a lot of good. But do you have any other tips on how to bring it in?
Well, certainly, I think that growing food on, in a windowsill or whatever it may be, whatever we have access to, is a great thing to do. And I think it's also important to know that even in New York City, even in the most urban environment, there are trees. And where trees grow, trees are purifying the air. Trees are, despite what it might look like, trees are really living in harmony with the earth. Otherwise, they wouldn't be standing strong. So if we just sit under a tree, maybe take our shoes off and lean against it and take some breaths, that's gonna be the best place to hang out in the city. And and also I think there's something really magically grounding and restorative of just doing that, regardless of whether it's one single tree and the median of a boulevard, or if it's in the forest. I think that whatever we have access to, we can use.
I agree. That's a great point. Well, let's bring that into the home. We've lived these lives, we learned this stuff, and now we're relearning everything. And I know that you have clients that you go into their homes and you help them think about, resituating in order to bring in this new type of lifestyle. What are some of the things that you suggest that we might do if we're just getting started, and that's one of the things that we want to focus on this week, maybe?
Mm-hmm.
That's a great question.
Yeah, specifically on this GMO topic.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because that's what we're talking about. I think the first step would be to take an exploration through the kitchen and start educating yourself on what the GMO foods are and seeing how often they sneak in to foods you wouldn't expect them in. Because again, we said that the biggest, baddest, scariest GMO foods are corn, soy, canola, and sugar. And so if we look at the nutrition label, not the nutrition label, but the ingredient list, we'll see how soy comes in a lot of forms. It comes in soy protein, soy lecithin, corn comes as high fructose corn syrup, corn starch,
corn oil, corn anything probably.
We see canola oil in a lot of our packaged pastries and things like that, and sugar, table sugar, that's also sneaks into a lot of our packaged foods. So unless there's a label that specifically says GMO free, those foods within those packaged foods are going to be GMO. And so there's going to be some level of glyphosate within those foods.
And that GMO free label is nice to see. And it's also interesting to note that, it is kind of just slapped on things without much thinking about it. What would be an example? Like apple, like an apple, which there's, no GMO apples might have a GMO free sticker on it. It doesn't, but I can't come up with it,
But for example, maybe a nutrition bar, like a Lara bar, that has mostly nuts and dried fruit in it, which aren't GMO foods to begin with,
right,
but they have the non-GMO label on it. Yeah.
But you don't need anyways, my point is you don't need, in that case, you don't need the GMO free label to know that there's no GMOs. You need to just look at the ingredients and say, okay, there's just dates and almonds and whatever else. These aren't GMO foods. I shouldn't be too concerned. However, unless that's also got the organic label on, then you better believe that there are other sort of chemicals, and whether it's Roundup or not, that are used in the conventional farming practice that these foods certainly do have on. And we also like to point people towards the Environmental Working Group, ewg.org, and you can find the Clean 15, which are the 15, safest produce things to buy conventionally grown. And these are things like, I don't have off the top of my head, but avocados, pineapples, melons, actually broccoli, mangoes, some squash.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then there's the dirty dozen, which are things that we really want to stay away from, non-organic, if they're not organic, like berries and greens and celeries and cucumbers and lettuce and apples and potatoes, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing that, in terms of what we would really recommend people doing in their home, like right off the bat, is also looking at the water supply and the drinking specifically. Hopefully we're drinking our water, right? And we know how important it is to stay hydrated. And given the fact that, like we've talked about, glyphosate is a water-soluble toxin, it's in the water supply, we want to make sure that we have a source of water that isn't drenched in glyphosate. And we, should be either buying purified water in, jugs or bottles or whatever it may be, or have a really good water purification system that we know and can trust. It does a good job of getting these kind of chemical residues out of the water supply.
And because we also like to minimize use of plastic, there's most grocery stores, there's reverse osmosis filters where you can refill your bottles over and over again, and it's really not expensive. That's what we've been doing for a very long time, as we've been in between homes, and now that we're settled, we are getting a more permanent water filter.
Ooh, cool. Love those ideas. Thank you.
Yeah.
So we've got a question from one of our audience members. G, thank you for your question. He's asking, what health, nutrition, political organizations can individuals join or support to fight the use of glyphosate and other harmful pesticides? For example, the Environmental Defense Fund, the Sierra Club, the Environmental Working Group, or others. Are there others?
Yeah, actually, there's one really great organization that has just been birthed, I believe, or at least it has been in our awareness, and it's called Farmer's Footprint. And it's an organization that educates and supports farmers in shifting to organic growing, like on the ground, direct, practical, real work that's being done, at the front line of this issue. And I think it's a really inspiring organization. They just put out a really brief documentary on the topic. I think it's just 20 minutes or so. I think it's just farmersfootprint.org, probably.
We have the link on our Just One Thing for Health page, too.
Okay, great. Yes, so that's from our Hippocrates Docs Thought Leaders, and their page is up. You can go to the website. They are the week 29 information. And he's asking another question. What can we do to influence the US EPA to regulate further Monsanto and the European Union Environmental Protection Governing Body to issue further regulations over Bayer? Bayer's a German company that owns Monsanto now.
Yeah, that's a great question. Way beyond my level of operation. But it does, this topic does fire me up to investigate and seek out real solutions. But do you have any ideas?
I mean, this is a question that I'm also pondering as well. So, I mean, what we do on our grassroots level is, of course, vote with our dollar, but obviously more action needs to be taken. So,
and I think you guys really brought it in with the whole conversation around the conversation. We have to be in the conversation.
Yeah, if you're at a restaurant, you got corn chips on the menu, just ask is this GMO corn? And then it gets the waiter thinking, oh, can you ask your manager? Can you ask your boss? Oh, should I be getting, organic corn in my restaurant? Maybe, and it just kind of brings it up. Yeah.
Relationship and distinction between GMO and organic?
Yeah, so the question is about the relationship or distinction between GMO and organic. So there's plenty of crops, like we kind of talked about, that are non-GMO, but not necessarily organic. And the ones to worry about are the wheat, barley, rye, millet, legumes of all sorts. And these fields that are growing conventionally grown product, they might not directly spray the Roundup onto the crop, but they actually, in many cases, spray the Roundup on the crop to kill it so that they can get another harvest out of the same field. So they think, so they assume that, oh, that must be safe enough. We're not spraying the crop directly, but we know that Roundup doesn't only affect the crop, it affects the microbial ecosystem in the soil, and it gets in the water supply and all these sort of things. So these sort of foods that are non-organic, but not necessarily non-GMO, can be just as harmful and just as big of an exposure to glyphosate as our GMO crops, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's actually there's a great video on nutritionfacts.org by Dr. Michael Greger, where he looks into the research of the amount of glyphosate residue. He compares the levels of residue on GMO soy, conventional non-GMO soy, and then organic soy. And he shows that the amount of glyphosate on GMO soy is just, way up here. On conventional non-GMO soy, there is a small amount of glyphosate, but really nowhere as near the amount that is on the GMO soy. And then on the organic soy, there's even less. There's trace amount on the organic soy. So that that study showed us that organic non-GMO soy is a safe food to eat. You don't need to avoid all soy or all corn, and well, we don't really like canola oil or sugar anyway.
Those are just, signs of junk food.
Yeah.
As far as we're concerned.
Yeah.
Well, and I'm glad you said that too, because I've come to learn that and treat that respectively. But, a couple of years ago, no, didn't know. So I believe it does still go back to the conversation, bringing more people into the awareness of what this is all about and why it's so important. Because in all honesty, it really is that we are, without knowing it, killing ourselves. And I just want to say thank you so much, guys, for being here this evening, spending your time with us, talking about this really, actually serious issue of GMOs and the big players who are, the culprits of our being in bliss. And this isn't even the bliss point kind of stuff, but it is so related, because the hamburger with the patty and the special sauce and the fries and the soda, I mean, it's all coming into and from some of the same places. So it is all very related. And I just want to say thank you for helping us to get deeper into this conversation, because it is so important that we do so. So before we wrap up, is there anything else that you'd like to impart to our audience that you want them to know and take with them that'll inspire them to be on this just one thing for their health this week?
I just want to say that, this topic can seem really heavy and, make us think, oh my gosh, what are we going to do with this situation? And I just want to echo what Ben said earlier, that our bodies are intelligent, that they know how to heal themselves, especially when we provide them with the most excellent food, most excellent fuel and nutrition. And so I just want that to be kind of a motivating statement, that it really does make a huge difference when you do choose those good organic, whole food, plant-based foods.
One thing that I would just like to add is that I think that similarly, like Susanna said, this can be a heavy topic that we can really stress about really easily. And one thing that we talk about all the time with our clients is how stress is really the most poisonous chemical as far as our physiology is concerned. So we don't want to add gasoline to the fire and really overthink this situation. We just want to do our best and relax around it and trust that our body has the innate intelligence to heal itself when we are really at peace inside and creating an optimal environment outside and inside.
Awesome. Totally agree. Bringing that from the inside means that you'll make the better choices. And so I want to say thank you to those who joined us live and in person. Thanks for the questions that we got this evening. Thanks for this great conversation. To our audience, join us next week when we've got a new topic for you. And until then, have a good one. Thanks again, everybody. We'll see you soon. Bye for now. And don't forget, go to our website, join our Facebook page. Find us everywhere and share with your friends and family, because we are on a mission to get this information out and we need your help. And we say thank you in advance, because we know that once you start hearing this, it's like Ben said, when the mind expands, it cannot go back. You know this now, and you'll be able to even bring the conversation up in your circles of influence. And that's what we need, to elevate the conversation. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next week. Bye for now.